So today I want to talk a little bit about decoupled Drupal with Flutter. And pretty excited about this. On the agenda for today, going to start out with a little bit of why you would even do native applications such as mobile or desktop applications with Drupal. So why would you connect the two? A little bit of background about Flutter. And then a brief bit about Firebase, because we do use Firebase in the demo app. And then we're going to jump into a good bit of demonstration of a working app. And we'll definitely have room for some Q&A there too. My name is Mark Shropshire, and I am a Senior Director of Development at Media Current. And I love new technology. Flutter is my current pick. Been doing Drupal for a long time also, but I love Decoupled, and this is my first time at Decoupled Days, but I followed this conference for a long time, so really excited to be here. So thank you for coming to the session and to Decoupled Days in general. A little bit about Media Current. Media Current is your open source expansion partner. That just means that we're focused on using open source primarily to help enterprises with their return on investment and to make good calls on software that they use in systems. Media Current's been involved with Drupal for a long time, though we're stretching into other technologies. Flutter is just a great example of that. So we like to solve all those technology challenges. And really our core mission is all about bringing together talented team members to provide those world-class solutions for the web. And also, we'll talk today, not just the web, but native applications. Okay, so let's kick into really why Drupal and native applications. What is this connection? What's it about? As you know, I don't need to talk a bunch about decoupled, I don't think, CMSs, but just a little brief in case someone's watching this video later. Drupal can definitely be a content hub, and it can provide structured content for many different interfaces. Even one Drupal site can do that. And it's just a great backend for applications and third-party integrations itself, actually. So Drupal is a good CMS for that on the back end. I could not talk about native applications without briefly discussing progressive web applications, and we're not going to dive in super deep to this. I did a talk at Drupal Camp Atlanta, I think about 2 years ago, on progressive web apps. Goes into more in-depth conversation, but PWA is definitely something to consider, and that's a non-native application, but we'll talk about some of the benefits here in a minute. But it runs on web platforms in web browsers. So just real quickly, why would you even build a PWA? There's definitely reasons, and some of those have to do with really that user experience. You want applications to feel as close to native speeds and things as you can. You want to improve conversions on top of just your normal website. Because PWAs have some capabilities that will enhance app-like features on the web. And also it's a little more budget conscious than a native application. Native applications can be a little heftier on the budget sometimes, although Flutter helps with that. We'll talk about that. But let's jump into this. When would we build native applications? And I'm not just talking necessarily mobile like iOS and Android, but also Linux and Windows and Mac desktop applications, and there's also Flutter for web now. But as far as native applications go that you actually compile and they have binaries, you're really looking to target speed as one thing. Generally, they are, and this is a generalization, they're going to be faster than PWAs because they're just closer to the metal. Although PWAs continue to get faster, which I'm excited about. But also sometimes you need to be inside the application stores. So you need to be in Apple's App Store, Google Play stores. Enterprises have their own internal distribution systems. And so maybe you need a native application there. And again, there's always this feature access concerns, like as PWAs improve and the web improves, those things are creeping into web, but they're usually going to be this push on the native side where there's access to features that you just don't have on the web yet, although that's always improving. One example is like push notifications in iOS, but there are others. And so maybe you just need a particular feature on the native web, on a native application. So I look at all these options. We talked a little bit about PWAs, a little bit about native, but I look at this stack of options that we all have building applications. These UX options. We should always start with responsive web. That's been around, I guess, from maybe 2010, 2009, somewhere in there. So having responsive websites are still good. And then on top of that, you can make decisions on whether you want to include some PWA technology in your website. And then lastly, is there a place for native? And one of the things in this talk I wanted to mention is why you would do native and not web, because that's often a question. It really comes down to business requirements. So some of those might be marketing in the app stores, enterprise deployment, and then just those features. So let's dive into what's Flutter. This is probably my favorite part of the talk, except for the demo. Hopefully that'll go well. It's live. So Flutter is basically a UI toolkit. It involves a lot of components that are called widgets that allow you to put together common idioms in the mobile space. As it started as a mobile platform, but now it's venturing into web and desktop. The beauty is it's all from a single code base. This has been the promise in development that we've had for years, right? With many other systems. Give me a single code base to do it all. I think Flutter does a really good job of this, but that's the core of Flutter. It is more of the UI toolkit, and then you can connect to any backends like Drupal that you want from there. So Google is behind the open source project known as Flutter, and one of the reasons I believe in Flutter as a technology that's up and coming and definitely has traction is because Google has dedicated teams to Flutter. There's first-class developer experience with a lot of common IDEs that are used. It's all open, not just the code, but Google's very open as far as planning and road mapping and that sort of thing. Really great documentation, and just a mention that there is a package site called pub.dev, which will allow you to go and check out all the different packages, real similar to NPM and other package systems. So here's a little bit about who uses Flutter. This just, of course, I pulled the names that I thought people might know, but some pretty impressive names. It may not be their flagship apps that are running it, but certainly they have apps. Some of them they are, but some of them are maybe other apps in the ecosystem for each of these organizations, but still pretty impressive nonetheless. And some key points about why you would even use Flutter from a high level, kind of really the marketing speak, if you were to communicate with developers. Fast development is always something that helps teams. So Flutter offers to do that. And some of those have to do with like hot code reloading, which is great. I'll be glad to demo that as well. And also, it has a very expressive, flexible UI, which is all about making sure that the application can look as close to a true native application. You can make it look very much like iOS or Android using basically components that have been pixel by pixel designed to look identical to those in those native platforms. And then native performance, we'll talk about why Flutter can get you very close and sometimes even right at native performance speeds, which has been something that I've been looking for years in other mobile platforms that are not native, such as writing in Kotlin or Java for Android or Swift for iOS. So I mentioned earlier I mentioned widgets earlier, but everything in Flutter is a widget. There's a lot of tie-ins if you're used to programming in React or similar JavaScript frameworks where you've got components. Everything is a widget, and So it makes it very easy to build your interfaces. It's declarative, and so it's real simple to work with and get started. I enjoy that a lot. So jumping in a little bit to contrast, predominantly the speed and performance differences between your reactive JavaScript approaches. This could be like React Native or others. One thing that has been in the past a hindrance, and I know that React Native has been making improvements on it, but there is a bridge type mechanism in between your actual JavaScript code so that it can translate the JavaScript and the calls back over to actually control the native widgets on the platform. So React Native would, for instance, when it does the date time widget, it's actually interfacing directly with the date time widget in the platform. And then all these services also go through that bridge. So the bridge can slow things down a little bit or a lot, depending on what you're doing. So as far as Flutter's approach, it's a little different. And this still kind of blows my mind to think about, because it doesn't seem like it would necessarily be faster, but it is. You notice there's not a bridge with the Flutter approach. Flutter actually completely ignores the widgets from the OS. It is pixel by pixel rendering those widgets, lookalike widgets, or whatever widgets you design. So that date time example is something that Flutter actually draws pixel for pixel. It just says, platform, provide me a canvas to draw on. And that seems illogical to me that would be faster. It actually is faster. There's lots of studies on the articles on speed and stuff you can check out, but that helps a lot. And there's also the concept of platform channels, which allows you to tie in natively directly to the services and features of the device that you're using. So that's cool. And just again, Flutter is not just for Android and iOS. That's where it started in a lot of ways, but now is moving into web. It's moving to desktop. Those are not at this point released in full stable. There are different release candidates or beta versions, but they are being moved along quickly, and people want them. A recent example of this is Canonical recently announced that they are going to allow Flutter apps into their Linux app store. I can't remember the name of the app store, but that was pretty big news a couple of weeks ago. So I'm super excited about that, as well as embedded. And I haven't seen a whole lot on embedded yet, but that is something. The idea is that the Flutter team and the community would like to have it so that we can deploy Flutter apps to all types of different devices and architectures. So you notice I haven't talked about JavaScript other than the React Native type setup, but Flutter does not use JavaScript as a language. Dart was selected. You may not have heard of Dart since years and years ago when it first came out, maybe as a competitor to JavaScript. From Google. Dart was selected for a number of reasons, and some of those include that Dart's already out of the box, ready to be a single code base for all platforms. It's type safe, which is great. It also has just-in-time compilation and ahead-of-time capabilities built into the platform that allows us to save a Flutter change in Dart and immediately within milliseconds see that change affected without going through a whole compile cycle. If you've ever done mobile development on native platforms, you pretty much have to wait for some compilation to happen, which can take some time. And it is still a C-style syntax. It's pretty easy to pick up a lot of. It's a very simple language, I would say. There's more that needs to be added to it, but they're being very careful as they do that. And the most recent news for Dart was adding null type safety, which was really big news. And so that is really helpful, especially when you're pulling things from APIs and such. but it built in, it's also got profiling, logging, a bunch of other great features. So my experience has been that for JavaScript developers, folks that have used reactive frameworks in other languages, Dart is not too bad to pick up. So don't be afraid of Dart from that standpoint, but it is a different language and you have to take that into consideration. Dart is growing quickly. This is some PRs from the last quarter, and notice it's on the rise. It's way behind JavaScript, of course. Everything else is as well. So that's that. But it is Dart is growing. So going to talk just a bit about Firebase, because we do use Firebase in the demo application that I want to spend some time demonstrating today, and that's why I'm pushing through the deck so we can get to that and have some time for questions as well. It is not just a cloud database. That I think sometimes becomes a misconception because maybe developers have used Firebase in the past and they've only used it for the database components. But it is more than that. This is, I believe, a Firebase marketing slogan: build apps fast without managing infrastructure. Sounds great. I can attest to that. You certainly can backend your Flutter applications with AWS. And if you've worked with AWS, you realize that you have massive control over the setup. However, you will have to do a lot of planning and have a lot of knowledge of how to put all of those puzzle pieces together. Firebase, I think, is a great place to start if your application gets a lot of traction and usage, whether it's from a cost standpoint or whether it's just from you need more flexibility. You could always graduate to AWS or some other cloud platform, or you could stay on Firebase if it suits your needs. And Firebase helps with development. I love it with Flutter because once I've learned a lot of the techniques, and Flutter has very good support for Firebase because it's a Google product. I don't have to worry about infrastructure, don't have to worry about any of that. And it's one platform that has a lot of features and they're always adding to it. Just a sampling from their website of some of the features. Cloud Firestore is what we're using for the demo app today. But they also provide authentication, which I hope to add to that in the future. And some other really cool things. Cloud Functions are there. So if you want to do some serverless things, analytics, messaging, and some machine learning capabilities, but a lot more. So definitely check out the link. I'll have the slide deck posted as soon as possible. Again, this is a Google product. They have a dedicated team to develop, and they've got first-class integrations with all of the tools and languages you expect. Again, excellent documentation. It is still ironic to me that the documentation, however, as great as it is, does not have example code in Dart yet, but there's a lot of examples out there already. So hopefully they'll add that in the future. So let's get into talking a bit about the demonstration and like what this application is about. You may be familiar or not. In Drupal, there is a install profile for an Umami recipe magazine. The concept here is that this is a way to kind of test drive Drupal, well, you could test drive it completely from a non-decoupled standpoint with it, with a theme in Drupal and all that, and have a recipe website running to more quickly see some of the capabilities that Drupal has and how maybe a site could be set up. But this is a magazine site that effectively would list would list recipes and all the ingredients and things like that. So I needed an API to work with, and so I have it. There's a public API with the Contenta project that uses the recipes from Umami, and I think even before that happened, even before that profile was added to Drupal. But there is a relationship there between the Contenta project and the Umami recipe install profile. But I decided, let's have a business reason. What's our use case? So this is always the question. Someone says, why would I even need a native application, right? It's a great question because a A lot of times, frankly, you don't. Maybe you don't have the budget for it. Maybe a PWA is just absolutely fine for your use case. So I don't think people should run out and just build native applications just for the sake of it. But as I talked about previously in this set of slides, there are definitely use cases. And so I wanted to kind of talk about a use case that felt, like a good one to present and talk through as if it was a project that I would actually make money on. This one is open source, so you can check it out freely, which is awesome. And the links and all that are in the resources of this deck. But let's say some of these are my goals for the project. This is a recipe magazine website. So maybe there's not even a print version, maybe there is, but people go to this site and they look at recipes. There's articles that come out, blog posts and all that. That's awesome. But one of the things from a marketing standpoint is there's no representation of Umami in the app stores for mobile. And we would like to get that in there just from a pure marketing standpoint, just to have the name there and have people be able to find it. That alone is probably not reason to write a mobile app and spend the money. However, it is one of the reasons that you can add to a list of reasons. And part of that marketing is to keep that recipe magazine brand top of mind. But we also want to provide useful features that, and this is the key to me, that you want to provide useful features that are not on the website. And, and I've got a good example of some of those and some ideas for future that we'll talk about. But the idea here is like, someone's going to say, why would I even download a native app? Well, you want to entice by saying, if you download a native app and you like our website and you like our magazine, download the app and it gives you all these other things that you don't get on the website currently. And so that's the reasoning here. And also, in this case for the presentation, utilize a native platform functionality that's not available in PWA yet. So that could be another reasons. And I'll just say, let's say that it's iOS push notifications as an example. You can do Android push notifications on PWA, so that's taken care of. So that's some of our use cases, like why we're doing this. And then here is the application, and I call this application Contenta Flutter. There is a Drupal CMS, probably a lot of folks at Decoupled Days are familiar with. Called Contenta. It's been around a few years. And one of the things that the Contenta project did great with was allowing folks to, providing an API and allowing folks to write front ends and example sites for the API. So they have that API hosted publicly. I was able to use that to pull down recipes from Drupal. And I'll talk about the architecture here in just a minute. But this is a lot of fun. So this is this app will run in Android and iOS. I've mostly focused on iOS now because I have an iPhone. But soon enough, I will get it, make sure it's working for Android, or create issues in GitHub for that. But the decoupled part of this is coming from a Drupal 8 site. It's the Contenta data. And it's read-only. We do not want to write back, which is probably the easiest way to decouple because we're not having to authenticate back. But from just a data integrity standpoint, I do not want to save anything back to Drupal because we want to save application state and application data. And that's really not what Drupal is set up best for. Drupal's set up best for housing content and serving content. So we'll just read that content from Drupal initially. And then we're going to use Firebase's Cloud Firestore, which is a NoSQL database, to store the app user data and allow users to authenticate. And then it's open source code base. So this is another reason for this. It's kind of a fun project for me to continue to learn Flutter and learn about decoupled things with Drupal and other CMSs. So I've got a repo there where you can check it out. And the old version of this that I worked towards previously is actually in the master branch, and the latest work we'll show today is going to be is actually currently in the develop branch. So if you're looking at the code, check out the develop branch. Hope to merge that soon. So let's take a look next at the architecture as promised. So we have this Drupal 8 backend. Again, read only, and we're using a there's actually a JSON API package that's on pub.dev that's fairly well supported. So I'm using that, using Drupal's JSON API. Imagine it's JSON API core now, but I don't have access to what Contenta is providing. I don't know which version of all the pieces they're running on the Pantheon install that I'm using, but let's assume it's core JSON API in Drupal, and I'm just reading that with JSON API. Could also use GraphQL because I believe Contenta exposes GraphQL. And I might prefer GraphQL, but I wanted to do some JSON API as a first step. A future goal is to use have a function in the application where I would actually read with GraphQL as a demonstration. However, would not recommend mixing those up. Normally, in a real production app, you would probably go one way or the other. So the data for the recipes comes into the Flutter app, and then right now the main functionality that makes it worthwhile having this app is you can favorite your favorite recipes. So we're actually saving the entire object of the recipe up to Firebase, Firestore, and then we are going to save and retrieve favorite data. Now there's not authentication set up yet, so we're just kind of operating as one user against this database. But that's a future piece I want to add on to is Firebase's authentication setup. So really, once we read that data, we don't really worry about a Drupal 8 source again, and that's just fine. So let's dig into a little bit of the demonstration here. I'm going to move some stuff out of the way, and I'm already running the app here in debug mode. Flutter's debug mode. It's native. There's a Dart and Flutter plugin set up for VS Code, and I'm using VS Code because I'm used to it for JavaScript things and other frameworks. So it works great. You can also use Android Studio as a great fit. If you already use Android Studio, you might prefer that. Let's take a quick tour of the application as it stands today. So when we go to the home page, we can see that this is our list of umami recipes. This page is displaying the read-only data through JSON API, the JSON API spec from the Drupal 8 site, and you can scroll through and that sort of thing. But this is actually the list of recipes from Drupal. Now, here's the cool thing. Let's take a look. Well, you can tell me how cool it is or not. We'll find out, right? This is the Firebase database, and you'll notice that I've got some recipes already queued up in here, right? We've got, so we've got a few recipes in here. That's cool. If you look at the app here, you notice there's probably more recipes than we have in Firebase. It's because these are all from Drupal. But let's say that we go to this pizza. I don't think the pizza is in the database yet, but when I click on this to view this recipe detail, it is actually going to check and see, does this exist in Firebase Cloud's Firestore yet? If it doesn't, it's going to push the object up. It's also going to set our little flag for favorite. Is it a favorite yet or not? So let's see if, I think this one's not in here. Let's try this. So I'm going to click on this, and you can see that was added. And I think it was maybe this one. It's the advantage of having such little data. Yeah, there we go. Did I say pizza? It's pasta. So now we have this in here. And from this point forward, we're simply ignoring the original source recipes, and we are actually focused on just pushing data and reading data from Firebase. So it's kind of like a disconnect. We could wire up updates, from Drupal and kind of do some sync in a future release, but that is not something we worry about right now. The only functionality working right now is the favorite aspect. So if I was to favorite this one, you are going to see immediately that flip to true. So that works. That's cool. I'm going to hit a back navigation item here, and let's look at the other pages. So we're back to home. I'm going to jump to about. This is some just static content. The image and logo for Umami is simply stored as assets in the application bundle. And so that is simple, and just some text in there. So real simple page. We'll show you some of the code for that, but not much exciting there. But the real functionality of why have a native application in this case, and something the website does not do, is our list of favorites. And you'll notice that this pasta item that we just favorited is showing up now. So we've got 3 items here showing up. These are all being pulled from Firebase. Now, if I go to this pasta item, and if I unfavorite that, it's gonna kick me right back to the favorites list and immediately reflect that the change happened. You saw that this goes to false, and we see that change happen here. And that's a real simple Flutter thing to do. So we can talk through that. So that's a lot of fun. So let's jump over to VS Code, and I'm going to show you the hot reload functionality, a real simple example. Right now we're in debug mode. It does take, depending on your computer and the app, does take some number of seconds to a minute or so, maybe, to first compile when you first go into debug mode. So it builds everything over and sets up, pushes Dart into the native platform and gets everything wired up for you. But then once you're up and running in debug mode, you can do things like this. I'm going to change, it's not Umami recipes anymore. It is Decoupled recipes, Decoupled days recipes. We'll maybe do that. So I'm going to hit save, and we should see this Umami recipes change very quickly. Maybe. Am I on the right thing? Oh, you know what? I'm on the wrong place. That title's not showing there. So let's go to that title, and we'll try that again. Actually, I'm going to copy this. That title's not displayed there. That was lackluster for sure. So I'm going to go under my screens folder here, and the home.dart file is the file where we have that title. So we're going to try this again. I'm going to change Umami recipes. There we go. And I'm going to save. And that's how fast hot code reload works. And it's pretty cool. The dev experience of that is amazing. It feels very much to me like working in JavaScript and web frameworks with responsiveness. But if you've ever, and it may not mean as much if you haven't done native mobile development, but if you have and had to wait for compiles, it means a ton to be able to have that happening. So that's kind of cool. So let's take a quick tour of the code, how things are set up in a Dart app. The first thing is we've got this pubspec YAML and pubspec lock file. These are real similar to, other package management files, npms and composer and things like that. So in here, this tells us the name of our project, some SDK versions that you can adjust that can affect which versions of Dart, for instance, you're running and expecting. These dependencies, these are packages from pub.dev usually, and you can just add those, and VS Code, the Dart plugin, will automatically pull those down and compile them. You can run command line tools. There's a Flutter command line tool that's pretty extensive. You can do all that manually as well. And let's see here. You can see we've got our assets. There's our logo and the magazine bundle that we have. That is all That is all just in the app bundle. So we declare that there. You can add fonts, other static assets. And really the IDE can kind of help manage a lot of that for you. Occasionally you might get into a place where you've got to do some commands in the Flutter CLI to fix things up, but not really too bad. So from there, the app launches, and the screen we have up now is the home.dart file. And I'm actually gonna fix that back. And here we did another hot code reload. I've got some globals that I pull in with this import. That looks familiar, right? So import, everybody's doing imports now, and so many frameworks and languages. So I've got some globals I pull in, and I'm importing those from, I believe, shared, and then we have one thing that may help you just ahead of the game on Flutter development is I usually start, and I believe most Flutter developers start with material design. So we usually just pull in material. There is a Cupertino for iOS setup, and you can use that if you want things to look exactly like iOS, or maybe to pull a certain widget to look like iOS in a certain need. But I usually start with material and then just alter. It's pretty easy to change the look of widgets. And then through here, this is a pretty standard widget. So we're just going to extend stateless widget. You either have stateless widgets or stateful widgets. That's pretty much the setup there. So this is a stateless widget. There's no state that you have to maintain here or worry about. And yes, there are lots of ways to deal with state in Flutter, as with JavaScript. So JavaScript frameworks, but this is a pretty long and ugly widget. So one of my goals is to break this up more, but this just shows you how you can really declaratively write your Flutter widgets and just declare things like, some of the, design look and feel elements. You can see an example of globals here where I'm pulling in the image URL. And I'll show you that real quick. This is the actual path I'm using for the API from Pantheon. This is the Contenta CMS path, which is a JSON API endpoint. And then I've also got a link to the images, so I can grab those images. And I'm not doing anything fancy with images right now, except I am caching them with a plugin. So from the home screen, we go to the individual recipe. So that happens here. We navigate with a material page route, and we just pass along the snapshot object of the data object here that we're working with to the recipe Dart file. And from here, notice this one's a stateful widget. So we have state. There's one reason we have state, and that is when we go over here to a recipe, we need to keep the state of whether this thing is favorited or not. And we have an async function in here that actually handles updating. Is that the right? No, this is the one, updating the favorite status. So that runs using async and await, real similar patterns to other frameworks in JavaScript. But that's an example of state in this case. And that's the only reason really we're using stateful widget here. Otherwise we wouldn't really need it. But we do need to be able to track that. And then when we go a little behind the scenes, when we go to the favorites listing, before I jump to that, I do want to show you this on the recipe page here. So, so this is the one when I go to the individual recipe that that we've pulled from Drupal but has not made it up to Firebase yet. So when you click and go to this page, we've got some things that happen here. We're basically saying get recipe, and we're checking, does this recipe exist? If the recipe doesn't exist, then we're going to build that recipe out and push it up to Firebase. If it does exist, or once it does exist, we're going to query the data and then have that available for the widget to display. So another improvement is I want to split a lot of this stuff up a little bit and also move it out of this particular file. into more of a services and model setup. But that's probably the most complicated part, is that pulling down and pushing up to Firebase the recipe. But when we go to favorites, it's much simpler. We have this real simple stream query, and this stream is built in as a tool that you can use in Dart. So I can just say, hey, give me this Firebase instance. Let me subscribe to that stream, and then I'm going to have that available. And that's the magic. That's all I have to do to make sure that when I'm in favorites, if I go to this Frankfurter salad with mustard dressing and unfavorite it, that's how it just immediately goes away. I don't have to do anything else. It's just subscribe to that stream, and it's going to update the entire widget tree from this file, all that's needed. And then, so I've got some shared components, like the bottom nav is shared. There's some state going on with that. I've got the recipe model, and here for the this is the recipe that's pulled down from jQuery. So I know we've just got a few more minutes. I'm going to check in with any questions, and we'll kind of keep all the app and everything running. So let's see what questions we have. I see some friendly faces. The community is so great. All right. Let's see what questions. I want to see how far back I need to go. All right. I know egg salad sandwich was first. Some in the chat. All right. I'm looking for. All right. So Paul's is the first one here. What's the advantage using Flutter for web applications? All right. Paul, I have a really good theory on this. If I am going to build a website, and if I'm just like, the goal is just to go build a website, I'm probably not going to use Flutter for web. I'm not saying you couldn't. You could. It's probably not quite production ready yet, but it's definitely getting close. But I would not build a website if all I'm doing is if that's the real goal, is the core of the application is a website. I'm not going to do that in Flutter for web. Where Flutter for web, I think, is going to shine a lot is, let's say that you have a mobile app. Let's say you started with this recipes app as a start. I think that's a great example, like where, you've got this, I got this great mobile app and people like it, and now they can add their own recipes, and they can, edit their recipes and all this cool stuff, right? And then someone says, a business requirement comes in, hey, can we have this on a website so people can access their favorites on a website and their recipes? That's where I think Flutter for web makes sense. You could go ahead and just spin up a Flutter for website. You'd have to do, you'd have to handle layout changes and things, but it's real easy to turn on Flutter for web. I could take this mobile app, change a few lines, and then it will compile, and Flutter for web works. But it's going to look like this mobile list of things, and it's not going to be very pretty. So you do have to deal with that. But that's the main use case, I think, is when you've already got an existing app and you want to just then present a web version. Any good resources for learning Dart and Flutter? So yeah, there's a ton of stuff out there. Brittany, I would say the docs. It's so funny. So there's a ton of Medium posts and blog posts on people's experience with Flutter. Stack Overflow is good still for as it is for other things. But yeah, Flutter, Dart, Corey mentioned dart.dev, flutter.dev, also for Flutter, checking those out. I wind up a lot of times getting like the best, I think, advice from flutter.dev at times. And then I just started over time following folks that I think are really super smart, way smarter than me in the community there. And there's a couple of Udemy classes. They're the two that are the most popular are probably pretty good, and they're usually pretty cheap. And then, if you're in an area that has a Flutter meetup group in Charlotte, we have one now, QC Flutter. Shout out to those guys. That's been a great resource because there's Flutter developers, and it's grown community. It's real welcoming. Feels a lot like Drupal, which I'm real happy about. So there's a lot out there, but I'm happy to share. And I've got some resources at the end of the presentation as well. That's a great Flutter examples apps is fantastic. Thanks, Jim, for posting the link there. And I think we just got a few more minutes here. But so let me, it looks like all the questions so far, and I appreciate everybody for attending. And I will just show this right thing. Yeah, here we go.
So we have one more question from Corey.
Oh, yeah, Corey. Yeah, please. Let's see. Oh, yes, I see it. Sorry, I've missed that, Corey. Corey, if you're using Firestore to store users' data, what's the advantage of continuing to use Drupal and pricing? So, yeah, so in this particular case, I would not use Drupal's user database. That would just be the content editors that would like work for the magazine, the theoretical Umami magazine. So I just, in this case, I don't care about that situation, although you might have a project where you do. And you certainly, and I actually know somebody working on a project, a friend of mine, who's actually writing back to Drupal. And so they're doing more of a traditional decoupled model. So you certainly can authenticate to Drupal. There's different ways to do that, as you know. So a lot of the decoupled patterns for doing that and to use Drupal's user data, OAuth probably being, a really good one. There's definitely patterns for doing that. The ones you would use for JavaScript frameworks would more than likely work well for you. As far as, so it depends, I think, on when you would use it. And as far as pricing goes, I would just say Firebase is pretty cheap, it feels like. It's probably doesn't feel as cheap quite maybe as AWS. And it's like your mileage may vary kind of thing. So it just depends on the use case. I heard some good advice in the last year from somebody. They said by the time, so you do get some free Fire. So I didn't pay anything to demo this. Like you do get some, you can set up free projects with Google Firebase, and you can do quite a bit before you have to pay anything. And it's still pretty cheap. But anyway, I've heard the advice that, by the time you're having to pay for something like Firebase or AWS like that, you should have a business model where you're making money to pay for it, right? That's the ideal scenario. But definitely check that out. I wish I could remember it. Someone else may. There is a site that compares cloud pricing. But yeah, follow me on Twitter. There's my LinkedIn. I'll have the slides out there. I'll probably post on Twitter, and if we can get it up on the site, Decoupled Day site. These are some resources. Some of them already posted in the chat. So everyone here is way ahead of the game. And I just thank everybody for being here today. So thanks.
Mark, we have one more question, with Srinivas, just, above.
Yeah. There we go. Performance issues, having a large list. All right. So I'm assuming that the list you're talking about is like displaying a large, let's say you had a bazillion recipes, right? Versus like 40. I think I've only got 40 or something in this one. Yes, you can have some performance issues. The Flutter does a lot of things automatically to help you along the way with that. For instance, if you set up a stream and if you're scrolling, quick example here. Let's see if I can turn this on. I'm in debug. So you'll notice if I start scrolling on the home page here, you'll see it start saying it can't. So some of the images aren't there on the API, so it can't find images, but you'll see that it's displaying the error as I scroll. So it's being smart about, that infinite kind of scroll where it's actually not trying to load up some array or object with everything at once and then try to display it. It's trying to be smart about like, oh, the user's requesting the next thing, so let me go grab that from the stream or the query. So, but I do think, it's a part of the fun of development. Your mileage may vary on that kind of stuff. And you just have to, but Flutter does do a lot of magic behind the scenes to help. All right. I hope I don't miss any more questions. JSON API.
Yep, there's one. Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm just reading
the questions. We're good in the questions.
That's great. Yeah, and I think we're running close over time here a couple of minutes, but and yeah, like so you're always, to Jordan's point, you're always gonna be limited to like you've got APIs and you've always have APIs that have limits and constraints. So you do have to check out that. That's a great point. Thank you, Jordan, for bringing that up. Thank you, everybody. Definitely, I'll be around. So feel free to tweet at Schropp or find me out there, and I'll be on hopping. So love to follow up with questions, and just love the opportunity to present today. Thank you.